We're talking about improving the balance of essential fatty acids in your diet. We're talking specifically about omega-3 and omega-6 fats, and here's why they're important. If we look at the root cause of disease, there are no exceptions. There is no disease that doesn't have an inflammatory link. Every link is linked to every disease is linked to inflammation. Whether it's the inflammation of the thousands of tiny blood vessels that service your wonderful brain, or whether it's all of the blood vessels in diabetes, or the inflammation linked to heart disease or cancer, it's the same story. No exceptions. Every one of the top 10 things or top 20 things that kill us are linked to inflammation. So obviously, if you're going to peel the onion and get back to the root cause, you're going to ask the question, what causes inflammation? Well, here's the big one. There are several things, including that junk wheat that seems to be linked to inflammation on a much bigger scale than most of us realise. But the big one is the balance between omega-6 and omega-3. And that balance should be 2 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. And what is it in this country? 21 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. What is in the US? 26 parts omega-3 to 1 part, omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. So why is it important? Well, we're talking about inflammation. You've got what's called an inflammatory cascade. You cut yourself, it gets a little bit pussy and sore. That's the first part of the inflammatory cascade. And that inflammatory part is driven by these little protein messengers called thromboxanes and prostaglandins that are made specifically from omega-6 fats. And then the healing part starts. That's the anti-inflammatory parts. And that phase of that 2-part equation, that phase is driven by little building blocks that also make these different versions of those protein messengers, and are built from omega-3. And your ratio is supposed to be 2 to 1. What does it mean when you're 20 to 1, which is the Australian figure, and the New Zealand figure? Well, you've got 10 times more inflammation builders than you have anti-inflammation healing builders. What do you think it means? It means you're going to be inflamed. It might be obvious like arthritis, or it might be less obvious like all the internal inflammation linked to these diseases that are killing us. So the obvious thing is, I'm going to improve my ratio. I'm going to dump the omega-6s from my diet, and I'm going to bring in a heap more omega-3s. So how would you do that? And where are all the omega-6s coming from? Well, feedlot. Any animals fed grain. Omega-3s come from grass-fed animals. Omega-6 comes from grain-fed animals. And you grain feed them their meat, which is supposed to be filled with omega-3, is filled with omega-6. That's number one, particularly for the meat eaters amongst you. Number two, the junk oils that we cook with. Sunflower, safflower, canola oil, absolute garbage, omega-6 dominated oils that have been partially hydrogenated so they last longer on the shelf, which makes them a trans fat, and there's no known trans fat that is healthy for human beings. So that's not a good story. The feedlot beef, just expanding on that, once you've fed more than 11% grain in the diet, you've got zero conjugated linoleic acid. This is a substance that's only found in the fat of ruminants, in milk, meat, and of course the fat, and it is now considered to be the most profoundly anti-cancer compound known, and it's gone completely once you get past 11% grain in the diet. So that's another reason to eat grass-fed rather than grain-fed. The other story is you feed grain to fatten them up, and there is a long-chain fatty acid amongst the saturated fats that is and can stick to your arteries. Grass-fed, 10% of that fatty acid, called palmitic acid from recall. And grain-fed, because you fed them up to fatten them up, and you fatten them with the wrong kind of fat, it's 50% of the stuff that can stick to your arteries and cause problems. So it really is junk meat, that grain-fed meat, and you want the good grass-fed meat. So you're going to change your meat, you're going to change your cooking oils, you're going to throw out the margarine, which is all omega-6s, and you're going to introduce them. So one of the questions you can use for every stage of your life is to ask the simple question, does nature approve? When you're bringing up children, and everything you do on the farm, does nature approve of this? And that question could be answered sometimes quite simply. In this case, we're going to ask the question, does nature approve of butter versus margarine? We scoop off some butter, we scoop off some margarine, we put it on a plate and we sit it outside. Now it must be a margarine that doesn't have a little bit of butter, because a lot of them have got 10% butter included to improve what's a pretty ordinary flavour otherwise. You ask the question, what do you reckon about this, nature? And watch what happens. Something arrives for the butter, sometimes within minutes, certainly within 10 minutes. Birds, dogs, cats, flies, microorganisms, if you had a microscope. The butter's gone usually within 15 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. I was driving down my drive, I had the back of my boot open and some groceries, and they're racing to catch the post office, which is only 5 minutes from my town, with an important letter. And tub of butter fell out and I ran over it. And I looked, and as I drove down the drive, I felt a bump, realised my back door was open, and there's the butter flattened out like a cartoon in the plastic, just a big. I thought, well, I'll pick that up when I get back. Drove down, posted the mail, dropped it straight in the box, came straight back, 10 minutes, zero, nothing there. Nature had discovered butter, and God knows what it did with the plastic, but there was nothing there. Something carted it off somewhere, and that is butter. The margarine's there after day one, it's there after week one, it's there after month one. It's still sitting on your lawn after a year. There is nothing on the planet that will eat margarine except the idiots that made the stuff. So, so you have to realise that and toss your margarine from your cupboard and never. I mean, I've been to Jerry Brunetti, my mate, took me to a margarine. Why they'd ever let you go through those factories? What are they thinking? Who's going to ever eat margarine after you've been there? The oils come in, poly and monounsaturated. Polyunsaturated, real unstable, often rancid when it arrives. Doesn't matter because of the treatment it goes through. They've got to pump hydrogen bubbles under pressure with nickel oxide to hydrogenate. See, you've got to take a fat that's not solid at room temperature, and the only way you can do that is to change the hydrogen and carbon molecules by it's called hydrogenation, and a trans fat is solid at room temperature, and now you create something that looks like butter. And you created this really toxic substance. So when you finish the first stage with all the nickel oxide and hydrogen, you've got this stinking grey gunk. And so then they heat, really big heat and bleach, and you've got this white sticky stuff that doesn't stink at the end of the second process. And then you add a series of dyes, including one of them that's got a really nasty reputation when you look at the research, and you make it look like butter. And now this margarine has been linked to, the most recent one is macular degeneration, which you can't actually cure. You walk outside, you can suddenly only see one little spot there and nothing else, or there, or in the centre with nothing, and you don't get that back again. And they've just conclusively linked margarine to that problem. They've also found that 75% of the gunk that can build up in your veins actually comes from these fats, not saturated fats, which is something different to what we've been told. So we want to get rid of those junk oils and use some decent oils as a starting point. And what's the best source, and how much do you need of fish oil, which is the big source of omega-3? I mean, you can use flaxseed oil, for example, on your salad. You can eat things like chia seeds built into different things. If you haven't heard of chia seeds, I'll talk about them shortly. But the best single way, here's the best way you can get some omega-3. See, the deal is to actually make a difference in this horribly inverted ratio, you need about 10 fish oil capsules a day, and no one does that. People take 2. Say, I take fish oils. Well, you're not doing much with 2. It's often about how much you take to make a difference. So you need 10. Here's a way you can do it much more cost effectively and with a couple of really good side effects. And it may well be the most important of all supplements that you can take. I had 16 doctors at my Radiance conference, a conference I put together that attracts 15,000 people each 6-day series, and I asked them before it started, these 16 speakers, well 15 and myself was the 16th, and I said, okay, here's the hypothetical. You've had everything banned, you're the experts on nutrition and supplements, you've got one thing left. What's it going to be? Choose, talk between yourselves and tell me what that one thing is. Well, it took them 2 minutes. Now, I thought it was going to take 15 minutes to argue about what was best. 2 minutes, they said, yep, we've all decided if we had one thing, it would be fish oil. Why? Because I've just explained how important it is in that whole inflammatory story to redress that balance. Now, the very best way you can do that was something called cod liver oil. Now, cod liver oil my grandmother gave me when I swore when I was a child. I stopped swearing pretty quick. But when I discovered how good it was, and I tried to take it, I just burp up this fish flavour for about 3 hours afterwards. And I was doing a course, a human health course, and there was an aging 97-year-old, a fairly old German naturopath. She certainly walked the talk. She looked amazing for her age. And she stood up and said, you never need to have that happen again. Here's your trick. Tablespoon of cod liver oil, and just so you understand, a capsule is 1.5 milligrams, or 1.5 grams, and there's 15 of those, there's 15 milligrams, which is 10 capsules in a tablespoon. So there's your 10 capsules, 1 tablespoon of cod liver oil. So you mix it with the juice, a full juice of a lemon. It just tastes like oily lemon juice. It's no big deal. You throw it down and it never repeats on you, and it never has. So it's a great concept. And the lemon juice is super alkalizing, surprisingly, and most people need to alkalize. So not only do you get sort of this big dose of omega-3s, but you get 2 other things, and one of them is hugely important. You get the highest known level of vitamin A, which is hugely supportive of your resistance against viruses, But the big one is this substance called vitamin D3. Now, there are so many studies on this in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's not actually a vitamin, it's actually a hormone, and we misnamed it. It was too late to change the name, but it's been found to be linked to so many aspects of your protection, including protection against cancer and a range of other things. And it turns out that we don't get what we need. We get it from sunlight. You've got to have 18 minutes with most of your clothes off every day between 10 and 2, which means you just see the tiniest pink change in 18 minutes of your skin, and that's the required amount of vitamin. And you don't go and have a shower afterwards because it takes about an hour to soak in. The skin makes the vitamin D3, then it's got to soak into your blood. So you don't wash it off straight after being out there. So Queensland's the Sunshine State, they call it. It's on the number plates, the Sunshine State. So our government just tested our people in Queensland for vitamin D3, and to the surprise of everyone, we had 78% of the population deficient in this hugely important nutrient. So here's cod liver oil, all of the omega-3s you need, this big dose of vitamin A and the highest known source of vitamin D3, and you get quite a decent dose with that tablespoon each day. So a wonderful thing to improve. The number one, it's taken me a while to talk just one of them, but one way, number one on the ways you can restore insulin sensitivity and the way that you can avoid inflammation full stop. So it's a pretty big one.